Welcome to day 6, the grafting tutorial. So we're just doing this on the DPNs, and hopefully you'll have seen how to set up your needles based on yesterday's tutorials. They're all the same. So the first thing you do is you thread your yarn through a darning needle. I use a curved tip darning needle. When I discovered these were a thing about 7 or 8 years ago, they changed my knitting life. They're so much easier to manipulate and get in and out. But if you only have a plain darning needle, it makes no difference, whatever suits you. So the first thing that you do is you make sure that you have the same number of stitching facing one another, and then you're going to do the grafting setup. So this is a matter of moving your needles in and out of the first stitch in each needle the right way, and this is just the setup part of it. So the first thing you do is you take your needle through the first stitch on the front needle. You go into that purlwise and you pull your thread through, and then you go into the first stitch on the back needle knitwise and you pull that through. And that is your grafting setup done. You are now ready to graft. And the rest of the movements, which are sets of four little movements for each one, they are all the same for the next number of stitches. So this time you take your needle and you go into the first stitch knitwise. And you slip that stitch off your needles. I leave my darning needle in when I'm doing that so that it pulls it out and gives it shape. Now you continue pulling it out through the thread then once you've that done. I just find it handier to leave it on the needle. I then take my needle and put it through the second stitch on the front needle, and I do that purlwise. And once I'm through, I make sure my thread is all the way through that. Then into the first stitch of the back needle, I go into that purlwise, and I slip that off, again leaving it on the needle so that I have a little bit of leverage. I pull my thread all the way through, and then I go through the second stitch on the back needle knitwise, and I leave that stitch on the needle. So it's a knit off, purl off, knit on movement, or as I think of it as a knit, purl, knit. And that's after you've done the setup. So then you're ready to work the rest of the stitches exactly the same until the end. So now you've done the setup and you're now doing the next set of stitches. So that second stitch is now the first stitch on the front needle. So again you're going to go into that knitwise, slip it off, again leaving your needle in it to give you a little bit of sort of sturdiness. You're then going to go into the second stitch on the front needle purlwise, and finish that move off. You're then going to go into this first stitch on the back needle purlwise and slip that off. And then you're going to go knitwise into the second stitch and leave that on. So grafting is basically knit, purl, knit, the 4 stitches once you've the setup done. And you'll have noticed that your setup is the same as what you do to the second stitches on each needle, so the purl and the knit without slipping off, and that's how you set up. So now we're going in knitwise, purlwise into the second stitch, leaving it alone, purlwise into the back first stitch, slipping that off, then you're going into the back stitch, second back stitch, knitwise, and leaving that alone. Then you repeat that move all the way along. You can see that it's quite tidy. You give it a little pull, but not too much, because you don't want to pull it in and pucker it. So now again we're going to go knitwise, slip it off, purlwise, leave it on, purlwise, slip it off, knitwise, leave it on. And that's the rhythm that you follow with garter stitch. Now something else that you may see me doing here is, or with grafting, apologies, what you else is seeing here as well is that I finish the whole move by taking all of the tail yarn through the stitches after I finish each one. If you do a lot of mattress stitching, you will be familiar with the fact that you can do a number of stitches before you have to pull through the thread for the mattress stitch, and it pulls it in together. I prefer to complete all of my stitches, or at least the 2 on each side, before I move on to the next one, because if you do too many stitches in advance, it doesn't pull through like it does for mattress stitch. So that's just something to bear in mind. So you'll see me doing 2 stitches here at the front and possibly 2 at the back and completing those, but I don't do any more than that at the very most, but do finish your first stitches, do finish your stitches before moving on to the next one is what I would say. So here we are, knit, purlwise still on, purlwise off, and knit and still on. And now you're at the last 2 stitches, and you are just going to do these as if you were doing the other ones. So you'll have done the first 2 are done. Tempting to go into the last stitch purlwise, but you don't. You go into that knitwise, because even though it's the only stitch on, you're still completing it as if it was the first stitch. So you go into that knitwise, slip it off, into the second one at the back, purlwise, as if you were just doing this, the first 2 stitches of the graft on each one, and then you are finished. What I normally do here then is I take my tail, I put my hand into the sock, and pop my tail in through there, and then I'm going to seam that in later, and we'll show you how to do the finishing tomorrow, but for now you should just admire your lovely graft. So that tightens it up and tidies it in. There are ways of making that even smoother, but I wouldn't worry about those for right now. Right now I would just admire your beautiful graft in your lovely toe of your lovely sock. So we will be back tomorrow for some finishing tips and how to seam your sew in your ends. Do a little bit of seaming, and we'll talk about blocking as well tomorrow. Thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon.